Hey there. Welcome back to another quiet evening together. Tonight's story begins with a picnic basket, a simple one. Woven straw, a little frayed at the edges, the kind you might imagine holding jam sandwiches, lemonade, and hope. It's Rose's story, and it begins in the spring of year 1971, when she packed that basket full of care and excitement, hoping to surprise someone who had been sitting quietly in her thoughts for months. His name was William. He had eyes like the sky just before it rains, and Rose had decided, on that warm April morning, that it was finally time to tell him how she felt. She chose the park for its soft quiet, the way it smelled like lilacs and warm grass. The benches were worn smooth from years of summer conversations, and the trees arched overhead like they were leaning in to listen. She imagined him there, the way he sometimes looked distracted when he was deep in thought, tapping a rhythm on his knee, like a song only he could hear. She planned to sit beside him, unfold the blanket, and offer a sandwich first. Then, slowly, the words. But the day didn't go the way she imagined. He never came. And yet, that memory never left. Before we begin, if these stories bring you comfort, please consider liking the video and subscribing. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments. Is there a moment you planned that didn't quite happen, but stayed with you anyway? Now, breathe. Let the day fall away, and walk with me into this gentle story not about what was lost, but about what stayed. The park hadn't changed much. At least, not the part with the old elm trees and the wooden bridge that creaked when you walked too fast. Rose noticed it right away, even after all these years. The same dusty gravel path. The same bench under the tallest oak. The pond where ducks still drifted, like little thoughts floating quietly past. She walked slowly, arm-linked with her granddaughters, the way you do when you're not just walking through space, but through time. Her granddaughter, June, was chattering about school, about a friend who got a puppy, about how spring made everything smell like cotton and possibility. Her voice had a melody one that reminded Rose of wind chimes on a breezy porch. Light, curious, full of tomorrow. Rose smiled, listened, but her eyes kept finding the places that used to mean something. There, by the willow tree, that's where she sat 50 years ago, waiting. And over there, just past the fence, that's where she placed the blanket, smoothing it over grass that had been stubborn and damp. The memory didn't sting. Not anymore. It simply lived, like a folded letter she kept, but didn't reread. Familiar, softened by time. She hadn't planned to tell June the story. But sometimes, the air itself invites you to remember. And today, the air smelled exactly like that April morning long ago, damp earth, distant lilacs, and sunlight warming the back of her neck. So, when June asked why she was smiling in that soft, faraway way, Rose just said, "Let me tell you about the picnic I once packed for someone who never came." And the story began, not in sadness, but in a breath, a quiet exhale of something long held, now ready to be shared. She didn't speak to fill the silence. She spoke to honor it. And the park, with all its unchanged corners and blooming promises, listened. Because some stories don't need to end in happiness to be full of it. Some stories, like this one, are shaped not by what happened, but by how gently we remember what didn't. In year 1971, Rose was 17 and full of the kind of hope that hums beneath the skin. Her room had floral wallpaper and a record player that leaned slightly to the left. She had a notebook with poems she never finished, and a shoebox full of pressed flowers from walks she didn't want to forget. That spring, something in her stirred. It started slowly when William began walking her home from school. At first, it was just the path they shared, But then, it became more than that. He walked more slowly beside her, asked her questions about things no one else noticed. Once, he waited in the rain with her when her bus was late. He didn't have an umbrella, just stood there, drenched, grinning like it didn't matter. She began to pack her lunch differently, just in case he asked for a bite. She started choosing her words more carefully, saving her favorite ones for him. There were no big confessions, no declarations, just small moments passed like notes between friends, gentle, full of something unnamed. Until one afternoon, sitting on the library steps, he mentioned he liked strawberry jam. That was all the spark she needed. She decided to plan a picnic. It would be a surprise, one of those whimsical gestures she had only read about in the books, stacked beside her bed. She'd never done something so bold before, but something about William calmly made her brave. She picked the park they always passed on the way home, the one with the footbridge and the wide open field. She imagined the light falling across the grass, the rustle of leaves, the soft sound of Sunday all around them. She borrowed her mother's picnic basket, spent a Saturday morning carefully preparing sandwiches, strawberry jam, and cream cheese, her favorite. She packed lemonade, wrapped the glasses in cloth napkins, and even tucked in a copy of a poetry book she liked, just in case the conversation turned quiet. She included a note, not a love letter, just a few words. "Come find me by the willow tree. I'll be waiting." She didn't sign it with her name, just a small, hand-drawn flower, the kind she used to doodle on the corner of her notebooks when he sat beside her in class. Her hands shook as she sealed it. The next morning, she slipped the note into his locker before school. She didn't see him read it, didn't want to. She wanted the magic of not knowing, the thrill of a question floating in the air. That afternoon, she wore a soft yellow dress, the one her mother said made her look like sunlight. She brushed her hair twice, tied it with a ribbon, and packed the basket with care, checking everything 3 times. The walk to the park felt like walking on the edge of a secret. Her heart was steady, but quick, a nervous joy. She reached the willow tree, spread the blanket, smoothed it down. Then she waited. At first, every sound felt like him. Footsteps, laughter, a rustle of branches. She checked the sky, the basket, her dress. She rehearsed what she might say. "Hi." "No, too short." "I'm glad you came." "Too eager?" "Would you like a sandwich?" Simple, safe. The breeze picked up. She adjusted the glasses, brushed a leaf off the blanket. More time passed. A couple walked by with a dog. 2 children rolled down the hill, giggling. A man passed, reading a newspaper as he walked. No William. Still. She waited. The sun dipped lower, painting everything gold. She tried not to look at her watch, tried not to imagine what might be keeping him. Maybe he didn't find the note. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he wasn't coming. But she stayed. Not because she expected him anymore. Because she wanted to give the moment its full chance. Because hope doesn't leave quickly. Because love, even the kind that hasn't spoken yet, deserves a little time. When the light finally began to fade and the park grew quieter, she slowly packed everything up. She left 1 sandwich behind, near the base of the tree, just in case. The walk home felt different. Not sad, just quieter. She wasn't angry. She wasn't heartbroken. She was something else. Something like changed. Like someone who had opened a door and found no one on the other side, but was still proud she had knocked. She passed the bakery on the corner, where the scent of fresh bread curled through the air. An older couple sat outside, sharing a pastry, their knees touching lightly beneath the table. She smiled at them, oddly comforted. At home, she placed the picnic basket back on the shelf, hung the ribbon from her hair on the mirror hook, pressed the small flower from her note into the back of her poetry book. She didn't cry. She didn't talk about it. But that afternoon became one of those quiet turning points, the kind no one else sees, but you carry for years. Not as a failure, not as rejection, but as a soft beginning of something else. The sun was warm, but not sharp. The kind of warmth that settles gently on your shoulders and whispers, "You have time." Rose and June walked slowly, their steps unhurried. The gravel path crunched beneath their shoes, a sound Rose hadn't heard in decades, but recognized instantly. They stopped near the willow tree. June looked around, her eyes curious. "It's so pretty here, Grandma. Did you used to come often?" Rose smiled, brushing her fingers lightly against the bark. "Once. A long time ago." June sat cross-legged on the grass, picking a small daisy and twirling it between her fingers. Rose sat beside her, a little more carefully, knees reminding her that time had passed. The park had changed in small ways. A new trash bin here, a few benches painted blue instead of green, but the bones were the same. The trees still arched like they were listening. The breeze still carried hints of lilac. Somewhere, a child was laughing. She looked at June, who was humming softly, brushing grass from her jeans. And before she fully meant to, Rose said, "I once brought a picnic here, for someone who didn't show." June turned, eyebrows raised gently. "Really?" "Yes," Rose said, her voice soft, not sad. "It was a long time ago. 1971. I was just a little older than you are now." June leaned in, interested. "What happened?" And so Rose told her. About William. About the note in the locker. About the ribbon in her hair, and the sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She spoke slowly, pausing sometimes to remember how it felt, not just what happened, but the weight of waiting, the shape of hope when it stands still. June didn't interrupt, just listened. When Rose reached the part where she packed everything up and left one sandwich behind, June whispered, "That's kind of beautiful." Rose looked at her. "I thought so too. Back then, it felt brave. Not in a big way, just in a small, quiet way." June nodded. "Like telling someone you like their song, even if they never heard you." "Yes," Rose said. "Exactly like that." They sat quietly for a while. Birds fluttered through the branches above. A bee hovered near a patch of dandelions, busy and unbothered. Then June asked, "Did you ever see him again?" Rose thought for a moment. "Only once. A year later, maybe, in town. He was with friends, and I was with my cousin. We said hello, that was all." "Did he ever know about the picnic?" Rose shook her head. "I don't think so. I never told him." June was quiet. Then, "Why not?" Rose sighed. Not out of regret, but reflection. Because the story didn't need a second chapter. It was whole, just like that. They sat with that thought. The grass was soft beneath their hands. A leaf danced past on a lazy breeze. Then June asked, "Do you think he would have come if he'd found the note?" Rose didn't answer right away. She looked out over the field. remembering the way the sun had looked on that day, the way it still looked now. Maybe, maybe not. I think I used to wonder that. But now I think some moments are meant to live only once. And that's enough. June picked another daisy. I think it's kind of perfect. Like the story finished before it even really started. Rose smiled. It taught me something. That it's okay to feel big things, even if they don't go anywhere. She looked down at her hands, now lined and soft. I didn't marry William. I married someone else. Had children. Traveled. Had joy and heartbreak, and all the messy parts in between. But I never forgot that picnic. Not because it hurt, but because I was proud I packed the basket at all. June looked at her, eyes full of that mix of youth and understanding. I like that you told me. I'm glad you listened, Rose said. Some stories get quieter over time, but they still want to be told. A breeze picked up, rustling the willow branches above them. They sat like that for a while. No more words, just presence. Rose leaned back on her hands, letting the light touch her face. In the silence, she could almost hear the creak of the old footbridge, the distant bark of a dog, the soft fizz of lemonade being poured into glasses. She thought of the sandwich she'd left by the tree. It was gone, of course, but the gesture remained. She reached over and took June's hand, giving it a small squeeze. June smiled. What kind of jam was it? Strawberry, Rose said. Of course, June giggled. Classic. They stood slowly, brushing off their legs. Rose's joints creaked, but she didn't mind. They walked a bit further, past the playground, past the small pond where ducks waddled in their usual scattered parade. Do you miss him? June asked gently. Rose tilted her head. I think I miss the possibility, but not in a sad way. More like a song you heard once on a train, and then never again. You remember how it made you feel. That's enough. June nodded thoughtfully. I have a friend, she began, then stopped. He's kind, but I'm scared to say anything. Rose smiled knowingly. It's always a little scary. What if he doesn't feel the same? Then you'll still be you. And that's enough. They reached a bench and sat again. This time, Rose pulled a small thermos from her bag. She poured them both a little tea, the way she liked to do when it was just the two of them. Tell me more about being 17, June asked. Rose laughed softly. 17 was strawberry jam, handwritten notes, and too many unfinished poems. Sounds messy. It was, and wonderful. That evening, back at home, Rose sat by the window with a blanket over her lap, a warm cup of tea in hand, and the distant sound of June playing softly on the piano in the next room. Outside, the trees swayed gently, catching the last of the sunlight. The golden hour filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the floor, shifting slowly as the light changed, just like memory. Rose's thoughts returned to the park. The willow tree, the warmth of June's hand in hers. She hadn't thought about that picnic in years. Not because it hurt, because it had become a part of her so familiar. She'd forgotten it had once been a moment, a single afternoon, a small hope wrapped in wax paper and ribbon. That's the way some memories work. They begin sharply, specific, defined by time and place. Then slowly, they soften. They become quieter, but not weaker, just gentler. Not faded, but absorbed. The kind of memory that doesn't knock anymore. It lives inside you, like the smell of a childhood room or the sound of a favorite voice. She watched the steam curl from her teacup, the aroma of lavender and honey rising. It reminded her of the sachets her mother used to keep in the linen drawer. Everything was tied together, she thought. Not neatly, not obviously, but gently. The picnic had taught her that a moment doesn't need to last to matter. That offering something, a sandwich, a note, your heart is brave, even if it goes unanswered. Especially if it goes unanswered. She thought of all the times since then when she had chosen to show up, even when she didn't know if it would be received. The letters she'd written to her father, even though he never replied. The apology she made to a friend who'd stopped calling, just in case it still meant something. The time she said, "I love you," first, and waited days for the words to echo back. Each one was a kind of picnic. Each one was a quiet act of hope, and none of them were wasted, not even the ones that led to silence, because the act of showing up, of choosing vulnerability, had shaped her far more than any response could have. She didn't always get closure, but she always kept her softness. That was the part she was most proud of. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth settle deep in her chest. In the other room, June shifted from one song to another, a slower tune now, more reflective. Rose recognized it as one they used to play on the old family record player when her children were young. She smiled. So much life had passed through her hands since that day in the park. So many birthdays and farewells. So many beginnings and adjustments. She had moved homes, changed cities, learned new recipes, and lost old friends. But the feeling she had on that afternoon, sitting alone under a tree, sunlight dappling the blanket, listening for footsteps that never came, that feeling still lived inside her. And she didn't resent it. She honored it, because it was real, because it had mattered. Not because of what it became, but because of what it revealed. That she was capable of loving with no guarantee. That she was strong enough to sit in uncertainty. That she could create beauty even if no one witnessed it. That was the true gift of the picnic. It hadn't made her bitter. It had made her braver. June's music drifted into silence. Rose could hear footsteps padding softly toward the living room. June peeked in, her face lit with quiet affection. "Still awake?" she asked. "Very," Rose said, smiling. "Want more tea?" "No, thank you, love." June walked in, wrapped in a sweater, holding her mug. She sat beside Rose on the couch, tucking her feet underneath her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Do you ever wish things had gone differently? With William, I mean." Rose looked at her, then turned back to the window. She thought about it. Then she said, "Number, I think, that moment, just as it happened, gave me more than a relationship ever could have." June tilted her head. "Like what?" Rose chuckled softly. "Like a quiet kind of courage, a trust in myself, and the belief that love doesn't have to last forever to leave something good behind." June nodded slowly, sipping her tea. Rose added, "Besides, if I'd ended up with William, I might not have ended up with your grandfather." June smiled. "Fair point." They sat in companionable silence. Then Rose reached for the small drawer in the side table and pulled out a weathered envelope. She handed it to June. "What's this?" "Something I found while cleaning a few months ago. The poem I was going to read to him that day. Never did." June opened it gently. The paper was thin, and the ink slightly faded. She read it quietly, eyes scanning each line. "It's beautiful," she said. Rose smiled. "It's a 17-year-old beauty, but I'm glad it still lives." She tucked the poem back into the drawer. "I used to think stories needed resolutions," Rose said. "Now I know they just need respect. Even the unfinished ones. Especially the unfinished ones." The clock ticked softly in the corner. The wind rustled the branches outside. A car passed slowly on the street. Then June whispered, "Thank you for telling me." Rose leaned her head against June's shoulder. "You're welcome." Later that night, long after the tea had gone cold and the conversation had drifted into stillness, June helped her grandmother to bed. The house was quiet in the way only late hours could bring. The kind of quiet that felt like a lullaby, wrapping gently around the edges of the day. Rose pulled the covers up to her chest and exhaled slowly. June sat beside her on the edge of the bed, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "You all right?" June asked. Rose smiled, eyes soft. "I'm full. That's the best kind of tired." June nodded. "Me too." There wasn't much more to say. Not really. Some nights didn't need conclusions. They just needed to be witnessed. As June reached to turn off the lamp, Rose said, "Will you sit a moment longer?" Of course. The lamp cast a warm golden pool of light between them. Outside, the breeze tapped faintly against the window pane, a rhythm slow and soft. Rose looked at the ceiling for a while, then said, "There are things you carry quietly your whole life. And then one day, someone asks the right question, and it opens." June looked at her gently. "Was it hard to tell me?" Rose shook her head. Numbered just delicate. Like unfolding a letter you haven't touched in years. They sat like that for a while. Then June said, "I think it's beautiful that you loved like that." Rose smiled. "It was just one afternoon." "No," June said softly. "It was a beginning. Even if it wasn't his, it was yours." The words sank into the space between them, settling like dust in golden light. Rose reached for June's hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. She didn't need to explain further. June already understood. Not just the story, but the silence that had followed it. The way some memories live more in feeling than in fact. The way the heart can hold both joy and ache, and call it grace. "You'll have your own story one day," Rose said. "I think I already do," June whispered. Rose looked at her. June smiled. "He hasn't missed a picnic, but he makes me nervous." Rose chuckled, her voice tired but bright. "That's usually a good sign." They laughed softly together, the kind of laugh that feels like a shared secret. June stood slowly. "I'll let you rest." She turned off the lamp and walked quietly toward the door. Just before she stepped into the hallway, Rose said, "You're a good listener." June turned, barely a silhouette now. "You're a good storyteller." Rose's voice, fading gently, answered, "Only because life gave me such gentle stories." Then the door clicked, softly closed. In the hallway, June paused by the bookshelf. She traced her finger along the spines until she reached a small, cloth-bound journal, the one Rose had gifted her years ago, with a note inside. "For the things that need remembering." She took it back to her room. By the light of her bedside lamp, she opened a fresh page and began to write. Not just the facts of what Rose had said, but how it had made her feel. The look in her grandmother's eyes, the shape of her voice, The wisdom is not carried in lessons, but in tone. She wrote about the picnic, the tree. The sandwich was left behind. She wrote about courage, about softness, about the way stories sometimes end without punctuation, and how that doesn't make them incomplete. And as her pen moved, she realized something quietly extraordinary. The story wasn't just Rose's anymore. It was hers too. Not as a memory, but as an inheritance. Something passed gently from hand to hand, like a ribbon in a drawer or a folded note slipped through time. Downstairs, the house settled deeper into stillness. A clock chimed softly. The refrigerator hummed. The air seemed to exhale. In Rose's room, sleep had begun to pull gently at her limbs. She lay still, the covers tucked neatly, the room bathed in soft shadow. Her breathing slowed. She wasn't dreaming. Not exactly. But she was remembering. Not the moment at the park, but the moment after. The quiet walk home. The weight of the empty basket. The way the light had filtered through the trees. She remembered how she'd passed a couple on a bench, their hands barely touching, and felt something warm, not envy, but understanding. She remembered the ducks in the pond, the way one waddled too quickly and tipped into the water. She remembered a child blowing bubbles from the back of a stroller. Even without William, the world had still been kind. That's what stayed with her. The way the world had kept whispering, "You are okay. You are whole." Even in the silence. Even without a reply. Even with the sandwich untouched. And now, all these years later, that same quiet message lives in June. She would carry it differently, perhaps. Maybe she'd pack a picnic and it would be received. Maybe she'd be the one waiting. But either way, she would know that showing up was enough. That love didn't have to be returned to be real. That sometimes the gentlest stories echo the longest. And as the night deepened and the stars blinked quietly above the sleeping house, Rose's story, once held close, then spoken aloud, became what it had always meant to be. Not a sorrow, not a regret, but a gift. The next morning, the sun filtered in through sheer curtains, gentle and golden. Rose woke slowly, not startled, not rushed, but like someone being welcomed back rather than shaken awake. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels like kindness. She sat up, her body stiff but steady, and reached for the notebook on her nightstand, the same one she used to keep tucked into her purse decades ago, back when she wrote little notes and lists and poems just for herself. She opened to a blank page and began to write. Just a few lines. About daisy chains and lilac-scented air. About how memory isn't a place but a feeling. About June's eyes when she listened. And about how, even now, the act of telling her story had made something new. There was no dramatic end to what she had remembered. No sudden realization, no revelation. But that was the beauty of it. The picnic wasn't about what didn't happen. It was about what it gave her permission to feel, to hope, to be open, to care for someone, even if only for a little while. Rose put down her pen, folded the page gently, and slipped it into the drawer beside the ribbon she'd kept all these years faded. Pink, a little frayed, still soft. She smiled. Downstairs, she could hear the kettle whistling. June was up. Rose moved slowly through the hallway, her hand brushing the wallpaper as she passed. She paused for a moment by the window at the landing, looking out over the yard. Birds were hopping along the fence. A breeze stirred the tall grass. Time passed differently now. Not slower, just more kindly. When she reached the kitchen, June was setting 2 mugs on the table. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning, love," Rose replied, settling into her chair. They sipped in silence for a few moments, and then June said, "I think I'd like to write about you. One day." Rose raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yes." June nodded. "Not just the picnic. Everything. You carry stories differently. They don't feel heavy. They feel like light through leaves." Rose smiled, deeply touched. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." "Well," June added, "you earned it." They laughed not loudly, but fully. And then, as the tea cooled, June said, "I told him." "Told who what?" "My friend, the one who makes me nervous." Rose's eyes widened slightly. "And?" June shrugged. He smiled, said he'd been hoping I would. There was a pause. Rose reached across the table and took June's hand. "I'm proud of you." "I thought of you," June said. "Of the basket, of the sandwich, of the ribbon." Rose squeezed her fingers. "Then I'm twice as proud." They sat like that for a while. Just 2 people across a small kitchen table, both changed in quiet ways that didn't need to be named. Later, as the sun moved higher in the sky and the day called them gently forward, Rose looked at June and said, "Will you take me back to the park next week?" "Of course. I'd like to bring a sandwich." June smiled. "Strawberry?" "Always." That evening, when the light began to fade again and the curtains swayed slightly in the open windows, Rose lay back in bed and looked at the ceiling, the air tinged with lavender. She didn't replay the picnic this time. She didn't need to. The memory had already done its work, and now it could rest, as could she. Some stories begin in grand, sweeping gestures filled with declarations and moments carved in stone. But then there are others, the ones that begin with a ribbon, a note, a picnic basket, a moment of waiting beneath a tree. And somehow, those are the stories that stay with us the longest, because they remind us that love is real. Love doesn't have to last to leave a mark. It just has to be honest. And when we share them, when we hand them gently to someone who listens, they don't disappear. They echo, they grow, and they become part of something even larger. So if this story brought you a moment of calm, a smile, or even a gentle ache, I hope you'll stay a while, and maybe share your soft memory in the comments. Something unfinished, something remembered, something that made you braver. Because even the stories we never finished still deserve to be heard. You are safe. You are seen. You are loved. Good night.